June 4th, 1942, 9:17 a.m. High above the boundless, indifferent expanse of the Central Pacific Ocean. The sky stretches endlessly, an impossible, brilliant, and utterly unforgiving blue. Far below, the colossal sheet of water glitters under the burgeoning morning sun, an endless field of shifting diamonds. There is no land in sight, only the vast, empty canvas of the sea and sky. Inside the cramped, sweltering cockpit of a TBD Devastator torpedo bomber, Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron shifts his weight, his eyes, sharp and intense, ceaselessly scanning the distant horizon. His throat is dry, parched from hours of focused concentration and the recycled air. His leather helmet, heavy and restrictive, is damp with cold sweat, not from the stifling heat of the cockpit, but from the crushing, almost palpable intensity of command, the enormous weight of responsibility he carries. He is the leader of Torpedo Squadron 8, known by its designation VT-8. He commands 15 aircraft, each a cumbersome, outdated, and tragically under-armored TBD Devastator. And in each plane, 2 men. 30 souls, all flying together in a loose, sprawling formation, each carrying a single, ponderous, and notoriously unreliable Mark 13 torpedo slung beneath their fuselage. They are flying utterly alone. Their designated fighter escort, their only fragile shield against the deadly Japanese Zero fighters, is gone. Lost in the chaotic, confused melee of the morning's launch from the aircraft carrier USS Hornet. They have been airborne for what feels like an eternity, but is in reality just over 2 hours. Their fuel gauges, mercilessly accurate, are already creeping past the halfway mark, a stark visual countdown to their maximum endurance. And below them, stretching to every horizon, there is nothing but the vast, empty, deceivingly tranquil surface of the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Navy, the fabled Kido Butai, the First Air Fleet, the largest and most powerful carrier strike force ever assembled by any nation at that point in history, is nowhere to be found. The coordinates they were given, the precise location provided by naval intelligence, were wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong. The squadron, a scattered gaggle of planes, each struggling with its own aging engine, is a desperate mix of seasoned veteran flight leaders and impossibly young, fresh-faced gunners, many of them barely out of their teens. All of them are staring at the empty sky, all of them doing the terrifying, cold calculus of dwindling fuel versus precious, rapidly vanishing time. The mission, by all rational military logic and protocol, is a failure. A complete, unrecoverable bust. Every instinct, every rulebook, dictates they should turn back. Return to the Hornet. Try again. Conserve their valuable aircraft and their even more valuable lives. But John C. Waldron is not a man of protocol. He is a man of fierce, almost preternatural instinct, a natural leader with a reputation for a near-mystical intuition, a quiet intensity often attributed to his Sioux heritage. He had gathered his men just one day before, his words echoing in their memories, a chilling premonition of the very moment they now faced. "If we run into the enemy, we will go in," he had told them, his voice firm. "We will not turn back. We will get a hit. If only one of us is left to make a hit, then that is our job." Now, he makes a decision based not on orders from above, but on that deep, guttural intuition, a feeling in his bones. He breaks radio silence, his voice crackling with static and fierce resolve into the headsets of his 14 other planes, the only sound cutting through the drone of engines. "Turn north," he commands, his order defying the official flight plan, the carefully laid out grid search. "I know where they are. We will find them, or we will not come back." He is right. He will find them. And in doing so, he and his men will fly straight into a towering, impenetrable wall of anti-aircraft fire, into the synchronized guns of the best fighter pilots in the world, into a slaughterhouse. They will be annihilated, a sacrifice so complete, so total, so seemingly futile, that it would, at first glance, appear to be a catastrophic, pointless failure, a tragic waste of brave men and precious machines. But they are wrong. The initial assessment is wrong. This is the story of that one-way mission. The story of 30 men in 15 planes who, in the span of just a few minutes, would change the course of human history, securing victory for a nation that desperately needed it. This is the story of Torpedo Squadron 8. To fully grasp the magnitude of the sacrifice on June 4, 1942, one must first comprehend the global chessboard and the desperate stakes of the Pacific War in the preceding months. 6 months had passed since the devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, an event that had crippled the American fleet and drawn the United States into the deadliest conflict humanity had ever known. Since that fateful December day, the Empire of Japan had been seemingly invincible. Their military machine, honed by years of conflict in China and fueled by fervent nationalism, had swept across the Pacific and Southeast Asia with breathtaking speed and efficiency. The Japanese flag now flew triumphantly over the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the vast, resource-rich Dutch East Indies, and countless islands. Hong Kong had fallen. Wake Island had fallen. Naval bases across the Pacific were now Japanese strongholds. The myth of Western invincibility in Asia had been shattered. The heart of this formidable power was the Kido Butai, the first air fleet, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Comprising 6 massive, state-of-the-art aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, it was the most powerful carrier strike force ever assembled. Its pilots were considered the elite of the elite, hardened veterans of countless air battles, possessing unparalleled skill and experience. This fleet, commanded by the brilliant but cautious Admiral Chuchi Nagumo, had spearheaded every major Japanese offensive and had seemed utterly invincible. The United States Navy, by contrast, was reeling. Its battleship fleet lay at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Its resources were stretched thin across 2 immense oceans, facing powerful enemies on multiple fronts. In the Pacific, they had only a handful of precious aircraft carriers left: USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and the miraculously repaired USS Yorktown. Damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea, she had been patched up in a mere 72 hours, a feat of incredible engineering and desperate resolve. Their only real victory had been a pinprick, a symbolic morale boost: the Doolittle raid in April 1942, where B-25 bombers launched from a Hornet to strike Tokyo. While a psychological success, it had inflicted minimal material damage. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the brilliant visionary architect of the Pearl Harbor attack and commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, understood the strategic situation perfectly. He knew that America's vast industrial capacity, once fully mobilized, would inevitably overwhelm Japan's finite resources. He had famously warned, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success." That 6-month window was closing. He needed one final, decisive battle. A knockout blow. A battle to lure out the remaining American carriers, destroy them once and for all, and force the U.S. to sue for peace on terms favorable to Japan. His target, a tiny, insignificant speck of coral in the middle of the Pacific, a strategic stepping stone, a minor outpost. Midway Atoll. But the Americans possessed one vital weapon that Japan didn't know they had, a secret that would tip the scales of fate: Station Hypo. Tucked away in a hot, cramped basement in Pearl Harbor, a brilliant, eccentric team of codebreakers, led by the maverick commander Joseph Rockefort, was working miracles. Rockefort and his dedicated team had been painstakingly, agonizingly piecing together fragments of the Japanese naval code, JN-25. They knew a massive Japanese attack was coming. They knew the target was codenamed AF. But what exactly was AF? It was the crucial missing piece of the puzzle. The admirals in Washington, relying on different intelligence assessments, believed AF could be Hawaii, or even the west coast of the United States. Rockefort, however, was convinced, with an almost religious fervor, that it was Midway. To prove his hunch, he devised a simple, yet brilliant, ruse. He had the American garrison at Midway send an unencrypted, plain-text radio message, reporting that their water distillation plant had broken down and they were critically short on fresh water. 2 days later, the codebreakers at Station Hypo intercepted a Japanese message. It read, chillingly, "AF is short on fresh water." They had him. Yamamoto's brilliant plan had been uncovered. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the stoic, resolute commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, now knew. He knew the where, and the approximate when, of Yamamoto's grand offensive. He had a desperately losing hand in terms of ships and planes, but he knew exactly where his formidable opponent was placing all his chips. He pushed his own remaining precious aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the miraculously repaired Yorktown, into the vast Pacific to set a trap. The stage was set for the most pivotal naval battle in history, a clash that would determine the fate of the Pacific. And flying directly into this trap, with a grim sense of duty and a full understanding of the dangers, were the men of Torpedo Squadron 8. The men of Torpedo Squadron 8, or VT-8, were not, by and large, hardened, grizzled veterans of countless campaigns. They were typical Americans of their generation, former mechanics from Midwestern towns, farm boys from the vast plains, earnest college students from bustling cities. All of them were volunteers, drawn to the call of duty after Pearl Harbor, and all of them were impossibly young, their faces still showing the smooth innocence of youth. Many of their rear-seat gunners, their only defense against attacking fighters, were mere teenagers, some barely old enough to shave. Yet, they possessed a fierce patriotism and an unwavering determination. They were led by Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron, a man who stood apart from many of his peers. At 41, he was considered an old man in the rapidly evolving, youth-dominated world of naval aviation. Waldron was a fierce, protective, and deeply spiritual man. He was intensely proud of his Sioux heritage and often spoke to his men of great spirit, instilling in them a sense of destiny and a higher purpose. He was a leader who inspired an almost fanatical devotion, his command not just tactical, but almost spiritual. He trained his men relentlessly, pushing them to their physical and mental limits, knowing how green, how inexperienced many of them were. But he also knew a terrible secret, a truth that gnawed at him constantly. He knew the machine they were flying was, by 1942 standards, a flying coffin. Their aircraft was the Douglas TBD Devastator. When it was first introduced in 1937, it had indeed been a marvel of aviation engineering, the most advanced torpedo bomber in the world. It was sleek, modern, and represented the cutting edge of naval air power. 5 years later, in the brutal crucible of total war, it was catastrophically obsolete. The Devastator was agonizingly slow, topping out at a mere 206 miles per hour, far slower than any modern fighter. Its single, most crucial mission was to launch its torpedo. To do so, the pilot had to slow the aircraft to a ponderous 100 miles per hour, flying perfectly straight and level at an altitude of precisely 100 feet. For an enemy gunner, this was not just a target. It was an inviting, almost stationary bullseye, a carnival game for death. It offered almost no armor protection for its crew or critical systems. Its self-sealing fuel tanks were primitive by Japanese standards. A single burst from a fighter's 7.7mm machine gun, let alone a 20mm cannon, could shred its delicate controls, pierce its fuel tanks, or ignite its wings. Its defensive armament consisted of just 2 machine guns, a single forward-firing .30 caliber machine gun operated by the pilot, and a single .50 caliber machine gun in the rear cockpit, manned by the gunner, who was almost completely exposed to the elements and incoming fire. And its primary weapon, the Mark 13 torpedo, was notoriously unreliable. It frequently ran too deep, passing harmlessly beneath enemy ships. It often failed to explode upon impact, its detonators proving faulty. And in some tragic instances, it even ran in circles, posing a threat to the very plane that launched it. Waldron knew all this. He had voiced his concerns to his superiors, his pleas falling on deaf ears. He had drilled his men in every conceivable tactic, every evasive maneuver, every emergency procedure, knowing that their survival depended on flawless execution and sheer luck. On the eve of the battle, he gathered his squadron for a final, somber briefing. His words, recorded by survivors, were chillingly prophetic, delivered with a quiet intensity that underscored their gravity. "We are going up against the best," he told them, referring to the Japanese pilots and anti-aircraft crews. "I want each of us to do our utmost. If we run into the enemy, we will go in. We will not turn back. We will get a hit. If only one of us is left to make a hit, then that is our job." He didn't promise victory, he promised duty. He finished with a final, stark, almost impossible warning: if we don't get hits, do not come back. It wasn't a threat, it was a desperate plea to complete their mission, no matter the personal cost. They were being asked to fly an obsolete plane, armed with a faulty weapon, against the best defended fleet in the world, protected by the best fighter planes in the world, the legendary Mitsubishi A6M Zero. The odds were not just stacked against them, they were insurmountable. One of the young men listening, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce determination, was Ensign George H. Gay, a tall, lanky Texan, just 25 years old. He was the pilot of plane T-14. Gay was young, outwardly confident, but inwardly feeling the same gnawing fear as the rest of the squadron. He, too, was utterly devoted to Waldron, ready to follow his commander into whatever fate awaited them. He, too, felt the sense of impending doom, the understanding that this was a mission from which few, if any, would return. But he, too, was ready to face destiny. June 4th, 1942, 7 a.m. The vast, windswept flight deck of the USS Hornet. The sun is barely beginning to climb above the eastern horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the steel deck. The ship, a floating city of steel and firepower, turns slowly but deliberately into the prevailing wind, its mighty engine straining, cutting through the swells. The call blares through the ship's intercom system, "Pilots, man your planes. Launch all aircraft." The deck springs to life, a tightly choreographed ballet of chaos and precision. Ground crews scramble, engines sputter to life, and the air fills with the deafening roar of radial engines warming up. Waldron, a grim determination etched on his face, stands for a moment on the wing of his Devastator, exchanging a final silent handshake with his co-pilot, then climbs into his own aircraft. Ensign George Gay, in plane T-14, gives his rear seat gunner, aviation radioman 3rd Class Robert Huntington, a quick, reassuring thumbs up. Huntington, a fresh-faced youth, grins back, perhaps masking his own fear. One by one, the planes are catapulted into the churning sky. First, the dive bombers from Scouting Squadron 8, VS-8, and Bombing Squadron 8, VB-8. Powerful Douglas SBD Dauntless aircraft designed to plunge vertically onto their targets. Then, the fighter escort from Fighting Squadron 8, VF-8, 10 sleek, agile F-4F Wildcat fighters, their task to protect the slower bombers. And finally, Waldron's torpedo bombers, the 15 lumbering TBD Devastators of Torpedo Squadron 8. But almost immediately, before the last plane has even left the deck, the carefully laid plan begins to unravel. The intricate coordination, vital for a complex air-sea battle, disintegrates into confusion and miscommunication. The fighter escort, those 10 precious F-4F Wildcats, launches first as planned. They are supposed to climb to a high altitude, circle above, and provide a protective canopy for the slower torpedo bombers. But a combination of unreliable radios, inexperienced flight leaders, and misread orders leads them astray. They climb too high, fly too fast, and quickly lose contact with the torpedo bombers below. They drift off, searching for an enemy that isn't there, their radios spitting static. They will spend the rest of the battle fruitlessly searching, as one frustrated pilot later lamented, as the most expensive spectators in the world, their formidable firepower wasted. The dive bombers, led by Commander Stanhope Ring, also climb high, adhering to their own doctrine of high-altitude flight. They, too, will mistakenly fly to the wrong coordinates, searching an empty patch of ocean for a Japanese fleet that has subtly shifted its position. They will find nothing, and eventually, one by one, return to the Hornet, their precious bombs still attached, their mission unfulfilled. Torpedo Squadron 8, led by John C. Waldron, is left utterly, completely, terrifyingly alone. No fighter cover to defend them from the swarm of Zeros. No dive bombers to draw away the anti-aircraft fire. Just 15 slow, vulnerable planes, exposed to the vast, empty Pacific. Waldron, flying low over the water to conserve precious fuel, sticks grimly to his assigned initial course. He is leading 15 planes, carrying 30 young men, on a trajectory towards oblivion. The sky above him is empty of friendly aircraft. The radio is silent, save for the monotonous hum of his own engine and the faint, anxious breathing of his gunner. He is a shepherd leading his flock into the wilderness, and he knows, with a sickening, intuitive certainty, that the wolves are not only waiting, but are now completely unhindered. 9:17 a.m. The sun climbs higher, illuminating the vast emptiness of the Pacific. Waldron's fuel gauges continue their relentless march towards empty. They are now at the critical point of no return. The assigned coordinates for the Japanese fleet are empty. The ocean below is vast and indifferent. This is the moment for a decision that will echo through history. Waldron, drawing upon a lifetime of naval experience, a profound understanding of maritime tactics, and that uncanny Sioux intuition he was renowned for, makes his fateful, defiant turn to the north. He has seen a wisp of smoke, a subtle change in the wave patterns, a fleeting anomaly on the distant horizon. Perhaps a shadow. Something. He knows. He feels it. For 20 agonizing minutes, they fly on this new, unauthorized course. Every second feels like an eternity. Fuel gauges drop further. The gnawing fear, the sense of impending doom, rises in every cockpit. Then, a voice on the radio, sharp, clear, and utterly electric, cuts through the static. Tally-ho! Smokestacks! Bearing 090. They have found them. The entire Kido Butai. 4 colossal Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, sailing majestically in a vast, arrogant box formation, their decks alive with activity. They are surrounded by a formidable ring of battleships, heavy cruisers, and destroyers, bristling with anti-aircraft guns. It is the jackpot. It is the tactical bullseye that Nimitz had gambled everything to find. It is also an unassailable fortress of steel, anti-aircraft fire, and deadly fighter planes. Waldron's voice, remarkably calm and utterly resolute, crackles through the headsets of his squadron. We're going in. Torpedo planes, attack. There is no hesitation, no second guessing, just duty. He doesn't wait for the dive bombers, who are still hopelessly lost. He doesn't wait for fighter escorts that will never come. He knows his duty. He knows his orders, his final words to his men. Get a hit. From the bridge of the Japanese carriers, the lookouts are astonished. Enemy torpedo planes, low on the water. No fighter cover. They can't believe their eyes. It's a mistake. It must be. It is suicide. The Japanese carrier Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, turns sharply into the wind, its vast deck still crowded with Zeros, some refueling, some rearming. The air crackles with urgent orders. Launch all fighters. Intercept. Destroy them. A swarm of Mitsubishi Zeros, perhaps more than 30, a hornet's nest of the best-trained, most experienced fighter pilots in the world, peels off the carriers and climbs with breathtaking speed, then dives, a lethal cloud descending upon Torpedo 8. They fall upon Waldron's squadron like wolves on a flock of utterly helpless sheep. The next 10 minutes are not a battle. They are a massacre. A systematic, cold-blooded execution. The TBD Devastators are hopelessly, pathetically outmatched. They are lumbering, slow, flying at their torpedo launch speed of 100 miles per hour. The agile Zeros are diving at them at speeds exceeding 350 miles per hour, their 20mm cannons and 7.7mm machine guns spitting streams of deadly fire. It is like pitting a bicycle against a supercar. John C. Waldron's plane is the first to be brutally savaged. Tracers from a Zero rake his fuselage, puncturing his fuel tank. His port fuel tank explodes in a blinding flash. The plane cartwheels violently into the sea, a plume of black smoke and white water marking its final, tragic descent. Waldron and his gunner are gone. The squadron, now leaderless but driven by his final, fatal order, presses the attack. They don't break formation. They don't scatter. They don't turn back. They fly straight into the teeth of the storm. One by one, they are executed. Plane after plane is ripped apart by the devastating 20mm cannons of the Zeros. Fuselages are shredded. Wings are torn off. Gunners, standing exposed in their open-air cockpits with a single puny .50 caliber machine gun, are cut down in a hail of fire, their blood staining the metal. Pilots, their faces grim, fight valiantly to control their planes as their instrument panels explode, their wings are shredded, their engines catch fire. Many simply disintegrate in mid-air. George Gay, flying his T-14 in the thick of it, watches in wide-eyed numb horror. It was like a training exercise, he would later recount, his voice still haunted by the memory. The Zeros were all around us, in perfect formation. They were just picking us off, one at a time, like shooting fish in a barrel. His gunner, Robert Huntington, is hit. A cannon shell rips through his cockpit. He is killed instantly. Gay's left arm is shattered by a burst of cannon fire. His plane is on fire, smoke filling the cockpit. The controls are shot away, barely responding. Yet, with a surge of adrenaline and an unbreakable will, he holds his course. He is 800 yards from the monstrous Japanese carrier Soryu. He pulls the torpedo release toggle. "Torpedo away!" he yells into the wind, a desperate, defiant cry. His plane, a flaming, mangled wreck, barely clears the carrier's deck, so low that he can clearly see the red sun painted on it, can see the Japanese sailors scattering in panic. He crashes violently into the churning ocean on the other side, engulfed by the spray and the concussive force. The sky is empty. The radio is silent. Of the 15 planes of Torpedo Squadron 8, all 15 have been shot down. 30 men launched. 29 are dead. One, Ensign George Gay, is clinging desperately to a buoyant seat cushion amidst the vast, triumphant Japanese fleet, badly wounded, pretending to be dead, hoping to avoid discovery. The sacrifice seems utterly, tragically, profoundly pointless. Not a single torpedo from Torpedo Squadron 8 hit its mark. It seemed like a total, unmitigated disaster. Ensign George Gay, a lone, silent observer amidst the enemy fleet, floating in the debris-strewn water, has a front-row seat to the next wave of American sacrifice. And it is a wave that would prove the true, devastating value of his squadron's sacrifice. At 9:40 a.m., just as the last of VT-8's planes are being systematically mopped up by the triumphant Japanese Zeros, another squadron of American torpedo bombers arrives. Torpedo 6, VT-6, from the USS Enterprise. They, too, are flying alone, their fighter escort having been lost. They, too, press their attack, driven by the same grim duty. And they, too, are decimated by the waiting, unchallenged Zeros and the blistering anti-aircraft fire. Then, at 10 a.m., Torpedo 3, VT-3, from the USS Yorktown arrives. This squadron does have a small fighter escort of 6 Wildcat fighters, but it is woefully inadequate against the overwhelming number of Japanese Zeros. They, too, press their attack, holding their course, flying straight into the maw of the enemy fleet. And they, too, are slaughtered, their planes shot down one by one, their torpedoes missing their targets. In the harrowing span of just 45 minutes, between 9:20 a.m. and 10:05 a.m., the American torpedo squadrons from all 3 carriers have been annihilated. 41 torpedo planes launched. Only a handful, perhaps 6 in total, will make it back to their carriers, riddled with bullet holes, their crews traumatized. And not one single torpedo, from any of the squadrons, has struck a Japanese carrier. From the majestic bridge of the Akagi, Admiral Nagumo, the mastermind of Pearl Harbor, must have felt an immense surge of triumph. The American attacks were suicidal, pathetic, utterly ineffective. His Zeros, the pride of the Imperial Navy, had performed flawlessly, dispatching the slow-moving, flying coffins with ruthless efficiency. His powerful fleet was, to all appearances, completely untouched, a testament to Japanese superiority. He had just won the Battle of Midway, a decisive, crushing victory. But in his moment of triumph, he had missed one critical, fatal detail. A detail that would prove his undoing. The sacrifice of Torpedo 8, Torpedo 6, and Torpedo 3 was not, in fact, pointless. It was the crucial anvil. The devastating hammer was about to fall. While the Japanese Zeros, in their lethal, efficient swarms, were down at sea level at 100 feet, systematically massacring the slow-moving American torpedo planes, high above, at 20,000 feet, the sky was completely, eerily empty. The Zeros had been lured away, distracted by the suicidal, low-level attacks. And at precisely 10:20 a.m., 2 other American squadrons, long lost, running desperately low on fuel, and operating on pure dumb luck, arrived in the battle space. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, leading the dive bombers from the USS Enterprise, had, like Waldron, flown to the wrong coordinates for over an hour. His fuel gauges were screaming. He was about to make the agonizing decision to turn back to the Enterprise, his mission unfulfilled. Then, in an incredible stroke of fortune, he spotted a lone Japanese destroyer, the Ayrshire, racing north, leaving a distinctive white wake. The Ayrshire had been chasing off an American submarine and was now speeding to rejoin the main Japanese fleet. McCluskey made a daring, intuitive decision. He would follow that single, tiny ship, gambling everything. At the exact same moment, from a different direction, Lieutenant Commander Max Leslie, leading the dive bombers from the USS Yorktown, also arrived directly over the Japanese fleet. Their paths converged at the perfect, most critical moment. The scene below them was not just a target, it was a dream. A perfect, utterly vulnerable target. The Japanese carriers Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu were in the very midst of rearming and refueling their planes. Their flight decks were a chaotic, congested mess of parked aircraft, exposed fuel lines, and stacks of bombs and torpedoes waiting to be loaded. And, most importantly, their formidable fighter cover, the Zeros, were all down low, out of fuel, out of ammunition, returning triumphantly from the slaughter of the American torpedo planes. It was the single most vulnerable moment in the entire history of the Imperial Japanese Navy. A perfect storm of tactical errors and American sacrifice. 10:22 a.m. McCluskey, his voice cutting through the radio static with absolute clarity, gives the order. Attack. The powerful Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, planes perfectly designed for this moment of vertical devastation, peel off one by one. They begin their terrifying, near-vertical plunges, their engines screaming in a 70-degree dive, siren-like wailers adding to the psychological terror. On the deck of the Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, the lookouts finally see them. Terror. Panic. Sirens wail, shrill and piercing. Orders are shouted, but it is too late. Far, far too late. The Zeros, down at sea level, are too low, too slow, too far away to climb and intercept. The first bombs from McCluskey's squadron hit the mighty Kaga. They ripped through the thin flight deck, detonating with catastrophic force amidst the fully fueled aircraft, the exposed fuel lines, the stacks of bombs. The carrier erupts in a catastrophic explosion, a mushroom cloud of black smoke and fire, a scene of absolute devastation. Moments later, the bombers from the Yorktown, led by Leslie, arrive. They target the Soryu. Bomb after bomb finds its mark, plunging through the decks. The ship is torn apart from within, a raging inferno, its steel structure twisting like paper. On the Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, the target of the Enterprise dive bombers, the first bomb misses, sending a plume of water geysering skyward. But the second hits, a devastating 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb that strikes the center elevator and penetrates deep into the hangar bay, exploding amidst the fully fueled and fully armed torpedo planes waiting there. The Akagi is doomed. A chain reaction of explosions rips through the heart of the carrier. In the span of 5 minutes. 5 astonishing minutes. 3 of Japan's 4 aircraft carriers, the invincible core of their first air fleet, were transformed from proud, majestic warships into grotesque, floating crematoriums. George Gay, still floating in the vast, indifferent ocean, his body battered, his mind reeling, watched it all happen. "I saw them," he said, his voice raw with memory. "They turned into volcanoes. The smoke and flames went thousands of feet in the air." The sacrifice of John C. Waldron and the 29 men of Torpedo 8, along with the subsequent assaults by Torpedo 6 and Torpedo 3, was not in vain. They had not been sent to hit the carriers. They had been sent to die for them. They were the bait. They were the sacrificial lambs who, by flying straight and true into certain horrific annihilation, had pulled the entire Japanese fighter screen down to the water, clearing the sky for the unsuspecting dive bombers high above. Their one-way mission, their hopeless, suicidal charge, their unshakable commitment to duty, had been the setup for the single most devastating and decisive 15 minutes in the entire history of naval warfare. The most significant tactical defeat suffered by the Imperial Japanese Navy to that point. The battle was not quite over, but the strategic outcome had been irrevocably decided. The remaining Japanese carrier, the Hiryu, a lone, defiant warrior, would launch a desperate counterattack. Its remaining dive bombers and torpedo planes found and crippled the USS Yorktown, the American carrier that had been miraculously repaired in just 72 hours, forcing her abandonment. She would later be sunk by a Japanese submarine. But the Hiryu's brave, final efforts were ultimately in vain. American scout planes located her, and dive bombers from the Enterprise and the reconstructed Yorktown Air Group delivered the final blows, sending the last of Japan's 4 carriers to the bottom of the Pacific later that day. By sunset on June 4, 1942, the Kido Butai was shattered, a mere shadow of its former invincible self. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the very core of their naval power, along with hundreds of their most experienced and irreplaceable pilots, were gone, sunk to the depths of the Pacific Ocean. Their loss was devastating, a blow from which the Imperial Japanese Navy would never fully recover. The tide of the war had definitively turned. The high watermark of the Japanese Empire had been reached, and the long, bloody, and agonizing road to Tokyo, leading through countless island campaigns, had truly begun. The balance of power in the Pacific, once heavily skewed in Japan's favor, had now dramatically, irrevocably shifted. Ensign George Gay, clinging to a seat cushion, spent over 30 agonizing hours amidst the debris and oil slicks of the Japanese fleet before being miraculously rescued by a PBY Catalina flying boat. He was severely wounded, exhausted, and deeply traumatized, but alive. He would carry the haunting story of his squadron, the vivid, terrible memories of their sacrifice, for the rest of his life, becoming an unwilling but vital witness to a pivotal moment in history. He became the living embodiment of VT-8's courage, its sole, surviving voice from the fateful Hornet detachment. The recognition for the extraordinary heroism of Torpedo Squadron 8 came swiftly. Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, which was later rightfully upgraded to the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award, for his extraordinary heroism and total disregard for his own life. His leadership, his unwavering commitment to duty, and his ultimate sacrifice embodied the highest ideals of naval service. Every single man in Torpedo Squadron 8, all 29 who perished and George Gay who survived, received the Navy Cross, a testament to their collective, unparalleled bravery and selflessness. Their actions set a new standard for valor in the face of impossible odds. Their aircraft, the venerable but tragically obsolete TBD Devastator, was immediately and unceremoniously retired from frontline combat duty. It would never fly in combat again, its brief, valiant, and bloody chapter in naval aviation history closed. Its performance at Midway, though tragic, clearly demonstrated the need for faster, more survivable torpedo planes like its successor, the Grumman TBF Avenger. The story of Torpedo Squadron 8 is a difficult one to fully grasp, even decades later. It is, undeniably, a story fraught with the bitter realities of obsolete equipment, of critical tactical errors in coordination, and the brutal, unforgiving nature of aerial combat at sea. It is a stark reminder of the immense human cost of war. But above all, it is an enduring, powerful story of human courage. It is a narrative of 30 young men who, when faced with an impossible choice between military protocol and the deeply ingrained sense of duty, between their own survival and the potential for a larger, strategic victory, chose sacrifice. They flew their one-way mission. And in doing so, they did not just get a hit, they enabled the hits that saved the Pacific. The strategic consequences of the Battle of Midway were monumental. Before Midway, Japan held the initiative, dictating the terms and locations of engagements. After Midway, the initiative shifted decisively to the United States. Japan, having lost 4 irreplaceable fleet carriers and hundreds of their best, most seasoned pilots, could no longer project power across the vast distances of the Pacific in the same way. Their offensive capabilities were severely curtailed. While the war would rage on for another 3 brutal years, costing millions of lives, Midway marked the turning point, the beginning of the end for the Japanese Empire. It bought the United States precious time, allowing its prodigious industrial might to fully mobilize and begin its relentless march across the Pacific. The tactical significance of VT-8's sacrifice is also profound. Naval aviation doctrine at the time, for both sides, dictated a coordinated attack. Dive bombers plunging from high altitude, torpedo planes attacking at low altitude, with fighter escorts providing cover for both. The idea was that the torpedo planes, by forcing enemy ships to maneuver to avoid their fish, would make them easier targets for the dive bombers. Conversely, the dive bombers would draw the enemy's anti-aircraft fire and fighter attention, allowing the torpedo planes a clearer run. At Midway, this coordination utterly failed for the Americans. Yet, paradoxically, this failure became the accidental key to victory. The torpedo squadrons, flying alone and unsupported, arrived first over the Japanese fleet. Their presence, no matter how ineffective their actual torpedo runs, forced Nagumo's Zero fighters to descend from their high-altitude combat air patrol to engage them at sea level. This critical action, repeated by VT-6 and VT-3, created a momentary but absolutely vital window of vulnerability. 4 precious minutes, the Japanese airspace directly above their carriers, the most vital strategic targets, was left almost completely undefended. It was precisely into this empty sky that the American dive bombers, led by McCluskey and Leslie, fortuitously arrived. Their descent, unnoticed until it was far too late, struck with devastating effect. The slaughter of the torpedo planes was not a failure. It was a brilliantly orchestrated, albeit tragically accidental, diversion that paved the way for the decisive hammer blow from above. The stories of John C. Waldron and his men became legendary within the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. Their actions solidified the unwritten code of duty, honor, country, and leave no man behind. It underscored the idea that sometimes true victory is born from the most profound acts of sacrifice, where the individual cost is immeasurable, but the collective gain is absolute. Their example resonates through military academies and tactical briefings to this day, a testament to unyielding courage and selfless devotion. But their legacy is not just one of strategic importance. It is a deeply human story. It speaks to the incredible psychological fortitude required to face certain death, knowing your mission is likely a one-way trip, and yet still choose to press on. Imagine the thoughts running through the minds of those young men, watching their squadron mates explode around them, seeing the Zeros making their passes, yet still pushing their throttles forward, still holding their course, still aiming their obsolete torpedoes. It is a level of bravery that borders on the incomprehensible for those who have not witnessed the crucible of combat. George Gay, the sole survivor, carried this heavy burden of remembrance. He devoted much of his later life to ensuring that the story of Torpedo 8 was never forgotten, that his comrades did not die in vain. He became a living monument to their sacrifice, a stark reminder of the real, human cost of victory. His vivid, often harrowing, accounts provided crucial insight into the moments leading up to and during the attack, allowing historians and subsequent generations to understand the sheer terror and incredible valor of that day. The Battle of Midway, and particularly the story of Torpedo Squadron 8, serves as a powerful reminder of several timeless truths about warfare and humanity. It illustrates the critical role of intelligence in modern conflict, the devastating impact of air power at sea, and the unpredictable nature of chance and fortune in battle. But perhaps most importantly, it highlights the unparalleled courage of the individual soldier, sailor, or airman who, when called upon, steps into the abyss of battle, even when the odds are stacked beyond measure. The Battle of Midway, fought over just 4 intense days, remains one of the most studied and pivotal naval engagements in history. It cemented the aircraft carrier as the undisputed queen of the seas, rendering the battleship, once the symbol of naval might, largely obsolete. It changed the fundamental nature of naval warfare forever, shifting the focus from big gun engagements to air power. But more than just a tactical shift, Midway was a profound psychological blow to Japan. The loss of 4 carriers, particularly the Akagi and Kaga, which had led the attack on Pearl Harbor, shattered the myth of Japanese invincibility and profoundly demoralized the nation. For the United States, it was a desperately needed victory, a morale boost that signaled a turning point, a promise that the tide could and would be turned. It provided the momentum that fueled the long, arduous island-hopping campaigns that followed, ultimately leading to victory in the Pacific. The legacy of Torpedo Squadron 8 is therefore inextricably linked to this monumental victory. Their sacrifice, initially appearing as a tragic failure, was ultimately understood as the essential, bloody prelude to success. They created the diversion. They drew the fire. They opened the sky. Without their courageous, doomed charge, the Japanese Zeros would likely have remained at high altitude, intercepting the American dive bombers before they could deliver their fatal payload. The Battle of Midway might have ended in a devastating American defeat, prolonging the war and altering the course of global history in unimaginable ways. John C. Waldron and his men did not choose to die. They chose to fight. They chose duty. They chose to give their comrades a chance, even if it meant sacrificing their own. They embodied the highest ideals of military service, laying down their lives not in a moment of triumph, but in a selfless, brutal, and profoundly heroic act of faith. They flew a one-way mission into the teeth of the enemy, not for glory, but for their country, for their shipmates, and for the hope of a victory they would never live to see. The vast, deep waters of the Pacific Ocean hold many secrets, many tales of valor and sacrifice. But few are as poignant, as tragic, and as utterly decisive as the story of Torpedo Squadron 8. 30 men, in 15 obsolete planes, in the span of just a few minutes, changed the world. Their one-way mission was not merely an act of bravery. It was the ultimate act of sacrifice, the anvil upon which the fate of the Pacific, and indeed the world, was irrevocably hammered out. Their memory endures, a shining beacon of courage against impossible odds.